Welcome to Bloomwood, Kentucky, where secrets bloom, gossip grows, and mysteries have a way of finding me. I'm Iris Thorne, and this is a Thorne Sister Sleuths cozy mystery. Previously in Buttercups, Barbecue and Burglary, a Thorne Sister Sleuths cozy mystery by D.G. Thomas. The investigation took a dangerous turn when Blossom and Thorne was broken into, and our notes were stolen. Calvin Denton seemed like the obvious suspect, but a closer look revealed his secrets weren't what they appeared to be. As new evidence surfaced, suspicion shifted toward church treasurer Cheryl Langford and those closest to her. Meanwhile, anonymous messages, hidden agendas, and growing tensions began tearing at the heart of Bloomwood Baptist Church. Now, the mystery continues. In Part 3, I think the pastor has something to hide. The text message sat on my phone screen for a long time. You're asking the wrong person. 5 words. No explanation, no signature, no helpful hints. Just enough information to make me question everything, which, unfortunately, it did. By Saturday morning, I was still thinking about it. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through Blossom and Thorne, while sunlight poured through the front windows, illuminating buckets of daisies, buttercups, and hydrangeas waiting to be arranged. Normally, flowers made everything feel hopeful. Today, they mostly reminded me how tangled things had become. The church was divided, the money was still missing, our shop had been broken into, and somebody was sending anonymous messages. The bell jingled. Dolly swept inside carrying a large tote bag and smelling strongly of gardenias, and wearing a bright coral scarf that somehow matched her earrings. I didn't know how she did it. I wasn't convinced she knew either. "Morning, Iris." "Morning, Dolly." She took one look at my face. "You're thinking again." I shook my head in agreement. "I am." She set down her purse. "You need pancakes." "Dolly, pancakes don't solve crimes." "No." She smiled. "But they improve attitudes." Honestly, that wasn't wrong. A few minutes later, Poppy and Scott arrived, with Violet twirling behind them, carrying a stack of bakery boxes. Philip, following the scent of the baked goods, followed close behind. By the time the shop officially opened, the consultation table looked more like a brunch buffet than a flower shop workspace. Nobody complained, especially Dolly. Halfway through a blueberry muffin, I finally told them about the text. The room grew quiet. Poppy frowned. Philip stopped chewing. Scott put his fork down and looked at Poppy and I. "Have you told Detective Merritt about this, Iris?" Even Dolly looked serious. "No, I don't know what it means," I said. "It means this is serious. The knot on the door, the break-in, now this. We all live here, Iris. This shouldn't be the first time we heard about this," Scott said, his voice raising slightly. Philip leaned back in his chair. "I think the meaning is obvious," he suggested. "We're focused on Calvin." "And?" I asked. "And somebody thinks we're wrong," he said. The words landed heavily, because I'd been reaching the same conclusion. I just hadn't wanted to admit it. For days we'd built a case against Calvin. The property dispute, the developer meetings, the secretive behavior, the missing money. Everything pointed toward him. Everything except one thing. That look on his face. Fear. Real fear. Not the fear of being caught. The fear of somebody losing control of a situation. Dolly nodded slowly. "Baby, I've been saying something ain't fitting." Poppy looked at Scott. "I promise we're going to stay in touch and tell Detective Merritt everything, honey. Don't worry," she said as she gently touched his arm. Then she looked at Dolly. "You think Calvin's innocent?" Dolly shrugged her shoulders. "I think Calvin's hiding something." "Same thing?" I asked curiously. "Nope," Dolly replied confidently. That was true, and maybe we'd forgotten it. Around mid-morning the bell jingled again. To my surprise, Calvin Denton walked into the shop. "Well, speak of the devil, or at least the prime suspect," Dolly said, looking surprised to see Calvin. "Dolly," I said in shock. The room immediately tensed. Calvin noticed. His shoulders sagged. I know. Good afternoon to you too," he reluctantly replied. That wasn't the opening I expected. He looked exhausted. The man appeared as though he hadn't slept in days. "Calvin," she replied, arms folded, lips turned sideways. "Poppy," Calvin nodded. "Calvin," Poppy nodded back, then looked away, pretending to clean the countertop. Finally his eyes settled on me. "Iris." "Hello, Calvin. I wasn't expecting to see you here today. How can I help you?" I asked, trying not to sound suspicious. It wasn't working. Nobody smiled. Nobody offered coffee or tea. That probably told him everything he needed to know. Calvin sighed. I suppose I earned that. The honesty surprised me. What do you want? I asked. He hesitated, then reached into his briefcase. The room instantly grew alert. Philip straightened. Scott pulled Violet closer to him. Dolly narrowed her eyes. Calvin removed a thick folder and placed it on the consultation table. What is that? Poppy asked. The truth, he admitted. Well, that certainly got our attention. For the next 30 minutes, Calvin told us a story none of us had expected. The Cherryville developer had been trying to purchase property bordering the church. Several parcels, vacant lots, unused acreage, nothing owned by Bloomwood Baptist itself, at least not directly. But development near the church could affect future expansion, parking, access roads, community programs. Calvin had spent months quietly trying to stop the deal, not because he wanted the land, because he wanted to protect it. I stared at the documents, letters, meeting notes, property surveys. Everything appeared legitimate. Everything. Poppy looked stunned. So, all those meetings were about preventing the sale, Calvin said. The room fell silent, because suddenly the strongest theory we'd had collapsed like a cheap folding chair. What about the family dispute? Poppy asked. Calvin rubbed his forehead. My grandfather argued with half the county. That sounded believable. He challenged property lines all over Bloomwood. So, the church dispute? I asked. Ancient history, he replied. I exchanged a glance with Poppy. This wasn't what we'd expected, not even close. Calvin leaned forward. I know how this looks. You do? Dolly asked, looking very doubtful. I should have explained, he admitted. Yes, you should have, I said. But some of the negotiations were confidential, he said. I believed him. To my surprise, I genuinely believed him. Then Calvin said something that changed everything. I think somebody wanted me to look guilty. The room went completely still, because that possibility hadn't occurred to me. Not really. Yet suddenly it made sense. The land records, the timing, the arguments, the rumors, every trail seemed designed to lead back to Calvin, like breadcrumbs or flower petals, deliberately scattered. Why are you telling us this now? I asked. I just wanted you to know, Calvin said, almost sounding defeated. Maybe from the town gossip, or carrying this secret about the land development for so long. I believed him, though. Nobody spoke for several moments. Finally, Dolly broke the silence. Honey, I looked at her. We got ourselves a bouquet of confusion, she said, then picked up the broom and started sweeping. I laughed to spite myself. Dolly, that's not helpful, but you can say that again. It ain't wrong either, Poppy added. No, it wasn't. By afternoon, our investigation had shifted dramatically. For the first time, Calvin moved off the top of the suspect list. Not completely, but enough, which meant somebody else had just moved higher. The question was who. Later that day, Poppy came rushing downstairs from the apartment, laptop in hand, looking excited, which remained deeply concerning. I found something, she said a little too excitedly. A good something? I asked. Maybe, she said. That answer was never reassuring. Poppy placed the laptop on the consultation table. Several financial documents filled the screen. Bank records, business filings, corporate paperwork. I frowned. Nothing that jumped out at me. What am I looking at, Poppy? I was tired and asked in frustration. Remember Cheryl's mysterious LLC? My attention sharpened immediately. Yeah, Poppy pointed. It isn't a business. What is it? I asked. A legal services account, she explained. The room fell silent. I leaned closer. Why would Cheryl need that? That's not the interesting part, she continued. I looked at her. The interesting part is, she's not the only name attached to it, Poppy explained. A chill slid down my spine, because suddenly Cheryl's nervous behavior looked different. Not guilty, protective, like somebody carrying a secret, or covering for someone else. The question was who. That evening, after closing, we sat on the porch above Blossom and Thorne, watching fireflies drift across Main Street. Scott grilled hamburgers. Violet chased lightning bugs through the yard. Philip continued researching things nobody else wanted to read. For a little while, everything felt normal, comfortable, safe. Then my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Again. I opened it. A photograph appeared, grainy, dark, taken from a distance. My stomach dropped, because the image showed Cheryl Langford, standing beside a car, handing an envelope to someone, a woman. The timestamp read 2 days before the fundraiser. No message accompanied the photo. Nothing except the image itself. I stared. Poppy stared. Dolly stared. Finally, Dolly spoke. Well, nobody answered, because we were all thinking the same thing. If Calvin wasn't our thief, then maybe we'd just found our next suspect. The photograph sat on our consultation table all Sunday morning. Not the actual photograph. Philip had printed 3 copies, because apparently 1 copy wasn't enough anxiety. The image showed Cheryl Langford standing beside a car in a grocery store parking lot. An envelope was passing from her hand to another woman. The timestamp was 2 days before the church fundraiser. That alone wasn't suspicious. People handed each other envelopes every day. Cards, receipts, cash, church bake sale recipes. What made it suspicious was the timing, and the fact that someone had anonymously sent it to me. Again, whoever kept feeding us information clearly wanted us looking in a certain direction. The question was whether they were helping us or manipulating us. By Monday morning, Blossom and Thorne was buzzing with customers picking up arrangements for funerals, birthdays, and anniversaries. The familiar scent of roses, lilies, and greenery filled the air. Buckets of buttercups brightened every corner. Normally, flowers made everything feel simpler. Not lately. Lately, every arrangement seemed to come with a side of suspicion. The bell jingled. Mrs. Henderson entered. Of course she did. At this point, I suspected she could smell a mystery from 3 counties away. Morning. Morning. She lowered her voice immediately. You hear Pastor Earl's behind on his mortgage? I blinked. What? No, I hadn't heard that. I took a sip of my tea. Mrs. Henderson nodded dramatically. Yep, I heard the bank's been calling. Dolly stopped trimming carnations. Lord. Poppy groaned. Here we go. Mrs. Henderson looked offended. What? You hear one rumor and suddenly it's the gospel, Poppy said, trying to defend Pastor Earl. Not one rumor, Mrs. Henderson continued. She lowered her voice further. 3 rumors. 3? Who did you hear this from? I was curious and had to ask. Well, you didn't hear this from me, but Anna May, you know Shelley Ann Swint's cousin, she began to explain. Yes, I shook my head, trying to follow along. Her uncle's nephew, Paul, on his daddy's side, works at Bloomwood Mutual Bank. Mrs. Henderson squinted and shook her head like this was a fact. I got lost somewhere between a cousin's uncle's nephew. What does that have to do with Pastor Earl's mortgage? I asked, in frustration. Mrs. Henderson made herself comfortable and sat down at the consultation table. Well, you know Paul works in the mailroom. They're old school at Bloomwood Mutual, so mailroom workers actually fold and stuff envelopes to be mailed out. Paul saw it, the overdue mortgage statement, said Pastor Earl is 4 months behind on his mortgage, and the letter from the bank was stamped, foreclosure, in bright red letters. He's seen it himself. We all looked at each other in complete shock. I've got to go, ladies. Nice talking to you, Mrs. Henderson said as she hurried out the door, back onto Main Street. The moment she left, Dolly shook her head. Poor Pastor Earl. You don't think it's true? I asked. Dolly adjusted her floral scarf. Honey, I don't know if it's true, but it sure did sound like it. She paused. But if it is, I feel sorry for him. That wasn't the response I expected. Dolly sighed. Everybody acts like financial problems automatically make somebody a criminal. The words lingered with me, because she had a point. Unfortunately, they also made me curious. Later that afternoon, curiosity got the better of us. Again. Poppy and I stopped by the church office. Pastor Earl sat behind his desk, surrounded by paperwork. The poor man looked exhausted. Worse than before. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper. His smile seemed smaller. And for the first time since we'd met him, he looked old. Not physically. Spiritually. Like somebody carrying a burden too heavy for one person. Iris, Pastor. He gestured toward the chairs. Come in. The office smelled faintly of coffee and old books. Sunlight filtered through the blinds. For a few moments, we chatted about ordinary things. Church attendance, flower deliveries, vacation Bible school preparations. Then I gently steered the conversation. How are you holding up? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He laughed softly. Truthfully? Yes, truthfully, I replied. I'm tired, he said, and slumped down into his chair. The answer sounded honest, painfully honest. Poppy leaned forward. Pastor, people are talking. Pastor Earl sighed. I figured. About your finances, I added. His eyes closed briefly. Not anger, not guilt, embarrassment. The reaction was immediate and genuine. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. My wife has been dealing with some health issues. The room fell silent. I hadn't expected that. Neither had Poppy. Medical bills? I asked. He nodded. We've managed. His smile appeared briefly, mostly. A lump formed in my throat, because suddenly all those rumors looked very different. Not a motive. A struggle. The kind many families faced and few discussed. Pastor Earl stared down at his desk. I didn't tell anybody because it wasn't their business. No, it's not, I agreed. It still isn't, he added. He wasn't wrong, and for the first time, I felt guilty for even asking. When we left the church office, Poppy exhaled heavily. Well, yeah, there goes another theory, I said. The pastor might be overwhelmed, exhausted, financially stressed, but I no longer believed he stole the money, not even a little. Back at the flower shop, Philip was waiting. That never boded well. What now, I asked. I found Cheryl's daughter, he said. Dolly immediately looked up. That sounded worse than you meant it. Philip sighed. You know what I mean. He turned his laptop toward us. Financial records, public court filings, credit reports. The sort of thing Philip found fascinating, and I found mildly terrifying. Her daughter, Amanda, is drowning in debt, he said. My stomach tightened. How bad? I looked at the numbers. It was bad. Very bad. The room grew quiet. Credit cards, personal loans, collection notices, past due accounts. The numbers painted a troubling picture. Suddenly, Cheryl's behavior looked different. Protective, defensive, fearful. Not because she was guilty, because she was trying to protect her child. A mother's instinct. One I understood all too well. Dolly slowly nodded. What? I asked. She tapped the table. If Amanda needed money. Nobody finished the thought. We didn't have to. The possibility was obvious. Maybe Cheryl wasn't the thief. Maybe Amanda was. Maybe Cheryl was simply covering for her. The theory fit. Too well, that should have bothered me more than it did. That afternoon, Scott stopped by with Violet. Violet immediately ran toward a bucket of buttercups. Miss Dolly? Yes, baby, Dolly replied. Violet pointed. This one looks sad. Dolly picked up the flower. Honey, that's because it's thirsty. Oh. Violet considered this, then smiled. So it doesn't need to be thrown away. Nope, it just needs help, Dolly explained. The room fell silent, again, because apparently children in Bloomwood spent their free time accidentally delivering life lessons. Scott laughed. I think she got that from her mama. Poppy smiled. Probably. For a little while, the mystery faded into the background. The flower shop felt warm, comfortable, filled with laughter, exactly the way Mama would have liked it. Then the next morning arrived, and so did the eggs. I stepped outside to unlock the shop, stopped cold, and stared. The front windows were covered. Yellow yolk dripped down the glass. Eggshells littered the sidewalk. The flower boxes beneath the windows had been splattered. Across the largest pane of glass, someone had spray-painted 2 words. Stop digging. The red paint seemed almost to glow in the morning sunlight. My stomach dropped. A few seconds later, Poppy joined me. Neither one of us spoke, not immediately, because this felt different. The note had been threatening. The break-in had been personal. But this was public. The entire town would see it. The entire town would know. Dolly arrived at Blossom and Thorne and saw the mess outside. Her earrings swung sharply as she stared at the vandalized shop. She crossed her arms. Well, I sighed. Please don't say it. She looked at me, then at the paint, then back at me. Honey. What? I asked. They done made me mad, Dolly said, with a very serious look on her face. For some reason, that worried me more than the vandalism. Because Dolly was many things. Warm, funny, patient, loving. But when somebody threatened her family, Lord help whoever made that mistake. As we stood there staring at the message, a realization settled over me. Someone was escalating. Someone was becoming desperate. And desperate people made mistakes. The question was, would they make one before somebody else got hurt? Mama always said flowers could survive almost anything. A late frost, a summer drought, a careless gardener. But even the strongest bloom struggled when its roots were damaged. That week, Bloomwood's roots were hurting, and everybody could feel it. The vandalism at Blossom and Thorne became the talk of the town before we'd even finished scrubbing egg yolk off the front windows. Folks stopped by all day. Some brought sympathy, some brought gossip. A few brought both. By lunchtime, we'd received 3 casseroles, 2 pies, and enough unsolicited advice to fill a church bulletin. Dolly accepted all of it, especially the pie. You never turn down a pie, she informed Philip. That's how people know you love them. Philip glanced at the growing stack of baked goods. At this rate, we're gonna need a second refrigerator. Dolly waved him off. That's future Dolly's problem. The shop laughed. For a moment, things felt normal. Then the bell over the door jingled, and Cheryl Langford walked in. The laughter died immediately. Not because anyone said anything, because tension has a way of entering a room before people do. Cheryl paused when she saw the fresh paint covering the cleaned window. Her expression softened. Gosh, I nodded. Yeah, I'm sorry this happened. The apology sounded sincere. That was what bothered me. Nothing about Cheryl felt simple anymore. Not her nervousness, not her warnings, not her secrets, and definitely not the photograph. She approached the counter. I came to pick up flowers for the hospital. Your mother? She nodded. A flicker of exhaustion crossed her face. She's having some tests done. For a moment, she didn't look like a suspect. She looked like a daughter carrying too much. I hated when people became complicated. Complicated people were harder to accuse. After she left, Dolly watched the door close behind her. Then quietly said, "That woman carries sadness around like a purse." I looked at her. What does that mean? It means she's worried all the time. About the money? Dolly shook her head. No. Then what? She sighed. I don't know yet. That answer stayed with me, because lately Dolly's instincts had been better than any evidence we'd found. Later that afternoon, Detective Merritt stopped by. She studied the newly cleaned storefront. The vandalism has everybody talking. No kidding. The detective glanced around the flower shop. Sometimes that's useful. How? I asked. People get nervous, she said. I raised an eyebrow. Merritt smiled slightly, and nervous people make mistakes. Apparently great minds thought alike. That evening, Bloomwood Baptist held a special congregational meeting. Attendance overflowed into the fellowship hall. The mood felt tense from the moment we arrived. Conversations stopped when certain people entered the room. Whispers followed others. Old friendships suddenly seemed strained. The missing money had done more than steal $7,000. It had stolen trust. Pastor Earl stood at the front trying his best to hold things together. The poor man looked exhausted, again. Every day seemed to add another layer of worry. A church member stood. We deserve answers, he demanded. Another nodded. Somebody knows something, she shouted out. Voices began rising. Not shouting, not yet, but heading in that direction. I glanced around the room. Fear, frustration, suspicion. The emotions moved through the crowd like a storm front. Then something happened that nobody expected. Pastor Earl removed his glasses, took a deep breath, and quietly announced his resignation. The room fell silent, utterly silent. The look on Poppy's face told me hers had too. A few people gasped. Others simply stared. Pastor Earl's voice trembled slightly. I love this church. The words sounded heartfelt. Painfully heartfelt. He continued, but right now, I believe someone else can serve more effectively. The statement landed like a hammer. I felt sick. Not because I thought he'd done anything wrong. Because I knew exactly why he was leaving. The stress, the rumors, the division, the endless suspicion. Bloomwood Baptist wasn't just losing money anymore. It was losing people. Afterward, clusters of church members lingered in the parking lot, some angry, some heartbroken, some blaming each other. For the first time since the fundraiser, I wondered whether we were helping or making things worse. The thought followed me all the way home. The next morning, things got worse. A local Bloomwood news station arrived. A camera crew, a reporter. A satellite truck parked half a block from the church. Apparently somebody had tipped them off. By lunchtime, Bloomwood's church theft had become regional news, exactly what nobody wanted. The flower shop remained busy, but the atmosphere felt different, heavier. Even the flowers seemed less cheerful. Late that afternoon, Scott stopped by the shop. He found me sitting alone at the consultation table, staring at notes. Iris. Hey Scott, I replied wearily. He pulled out a chair and sat down. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked the question I'd been avoiding. Was all this worth it? I looked up. The concern in his eyes caught me off guard. Not criticism, concern. I don't know. We were just trying to help, I said, looking out of the shop window. Scott nodded. Maybe it's time to let the police handle it. The words hurt more than they should have, because part of me agreed. Maybe we were making things worse. Maybe the mystery wasn't ours to solve. Maybe we'd become so focused on finding answers that we'd miss the damage happening around us. That night, after closing, Poppy and I sat outside. Fireflies drifted lazily above Main Street. The scent of honeysuckle filled the warm evening air. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Poppy handed me a glass of sweet iced tea. You thinking about quitting? I stared into the darkness. Maybe. Poppy nodded slowly. Me too. Scott is really worried about Violet and me. You and Philip too. I know he is, I slowly admitted. The honesty surprised me. For several minutes, we sat quietly. Then she smiled. You know what Mama would say. I laughed softly. Unfortunately, I did. Mama Thorne had possessed an endless supply of wisdom, most of it inconvenient. Truth doesn't stay buried, I said. Poppy smiled. No matter how much sugar you sprinkle on top. I shook my head. She really loved that saying. Because it was true, Poppy defended. Maybe, maybe not. At that moment I wasn't sure of much. A tiny detail, one I'd completely forgotten. I sat up straighter. Poppy immediately noticed. What? The Buttercups, I said. What about them? She asked. I stood, my pulse quickening. The church order. Poppy frowned. Iris, the count was off, I said. What? Poppy shouted. I hurried inside. Poppy followed. A few minutes later we were digging through delivery paperwork. Order sheets, invoices, pickup forms. Then I found it. The original church order. And there it was. 5 Buttercup centerpieces. Missing. Not stolen from the shop. Missing from the final church inventory. 5 vases. 5 arrangements. Gone. Because suddenly, I remembered something else. The flowers had disappeared before the money did. I looked at Poppy. She looked at me. Neither of us spoke. Not until Philip appeared. What's going on? He said, rubbing his eyes and half asleep. I pointed at the paperwork. The Buttercups. Philip looked tired and confused, then frowned. That's weird. I'm going to bed, he said and went back upstairs. He's right. It's very weird. Nobody had mentioned missing flowers, I said. Nobody, not once. Yet 5 centerpieces had vanished. And suddenly, for reasons I couldn't explain, that felt important. Very important. The next morning I found myself standing inside the church office, looking around for a clue, any clue about the vases. Then, while staring at a row of overgrown azalea bushes, I saw it. One of the missing Buttercup vases. My stomach dropped, because somebody had gone to a lot of trouble to hide it. And if one vase was hidden there, where were the other 4? And why was someone hiding them? I've got more to tell you. To be continued in part 4. This was never about the money. If you enjoyed this Bloomwood mystery, be sure to subscribe for the next Thorne Sisters story, because around here, trouble has a funny way of blooming when you least expect it. Next time on Buttercups, Barbecue, and Burglary. The church was divided, friendships were breaking, and one forgotten clue was about to change everything we thought we knew about the missing money. Because the truth hiding in Bloomwood was bigger than a theft, and far more dangerous. Continue the mystery in part 4. This was never about the money.
Read the Thorne Sister Sleuths Cozy Mystery Series. Available wherever paperbacks are sold and on Audible, Kindle, and free on Kindle Unlimited.